This is a new and strange environment at first, suddenly finding yourself in orbit.
I'm Neville Andrew Mera, and this is Never Normal, a show about breaking free from the boring default plan and living life on your terms instead. My guest for this episode is Verity Harrison. Verity is a freelance graphic recorder and visual storyteller, which means she gets paid to doodle meetings. Verity takes complicated business concepts and distills them down into easy to understand and fun to look at graphics. Verity is also an incredible example of what you can accomplish by stacking together different skills, experiences, talents, and passion. Verity, welcome to Never Normal.
Hi, thank you for having me on the show. I'm flattered.
As I said to you before we started recording, when we first met, when it was last November, I was like, well, it was funny. Two things happened. One, once you told me your story and what you do, I was like, I have got to interview this woman. But I don't know if you know this, what actually happened. We were both sitting in like a lecture room, and I was sitting, I think, a couple of rows behind you and a few seats over. And instead of paying attention to the presenter, the person who was on stage, I was just looking over your shoulder at your iPad the entire time, like, I don't know, like a very poor cheat in a college class. And I was just watching, like, what is she doing? Like, it was just the most fascinating thing I had ever seen. I was just in awe. So I think that's a good place to start. Can you tell us what is graphic recording that you do?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, effectively, what I do is I draw what people say, and that can take on a number of different, how would I put it? I can do it in different ways. When you actually saw me, we were at Nomad City, and I was literally capturing the keynote speakers' speech, their presentation. But I also will work a large scale on paper, and I will go to conferences. Well, this is when we could still go to conferences and whatever, and work on large scale graphics like 3 meters by 1 meter, and I will be there for the whole conference, and I will literally just capture the key points of what the presentations are about, or even breakout groups, workshops, and whatever. And the idea is at the end of it, there is a visual memory of what's gone on. And what it does is replace the reams and reams of maybe PowerPoint presentations that generally people don't look at after a conference. And at the same time, it's when you've got something that's being captured visually, it is much easier to actually recall what was said, and I will try and do it in an engaging way. I will try and use humor. I very much listen for metaphors and whatever when I'm capturing what people are saying. And then I also do static illustration generally for large organizations and NGOs, and some animation as well. But ultimately, I call it, visual storytelling, and graphic recording is one part of that.
For anyone who's just listening to the audio of this, we've got audio and video. Make sure to check out the links to see some examples of Verity's work, because it's really cool. I mean, the best way I can describe it for someone who's just listening is it's almost like a comic in terms of like the format and the easiness of just kind of looking at it and getting the gist, but it's actually business in the case of the conference that we were at, right? It's a business, is what's being said, it's big ideas, it's like a presentation, but turned into something that's just like almost like a doodle. But yeah, I'd never seen anything like that before. I'd never heard of graphic recording. And as I was just watching over your shoulder and what you're doing on the iPad, I was just so fascinated. I had to come down and talk to you. And then you told me that, like, you were attending this conference, but that normally you do this professionally. How does that work typically? Like, do the conference organizers pay you to come and record what's going on, or like how does someone even engage with you?
So usually it'll be the company who contacts me, and it just asks me if I'm available on certain dates. Can I come and do it? I've had event organizers as well, and I've been doing this now for the best part of about 6-7 years, and a lot of it's word of mouth. There is quite a big graphic recording community, graphic facilitation community, and when I first got started, I put a lot on my social media and literally, and also I found a group of people on Twitter who did something called Today's Doodle, and I got to know these people, and so. And we used to post things on a regular basis, and my first bits of work came through a contact on through Twitter. So yeah, no. I mean, I literally have been quite lucky in I say, the first bit of promotion was using social media, but then people got to know what I did, and very often people would say to me, can you do this? And I'd be like, yeah, sure. And then figure out how I was going to do whatever I was doing, and I think also just what's useful and what's helped me is because my background is I have a design degree, but then I worked in a corporate environment for 20 years, so I understand business speak, I understand company structure, I understand what is going to be needed and what's going to be important, and so I've had repeat business from clients, and as I say, it's quite a lot has been word of mouth. And having been in sales for 20 years, the fact that I've not had to do a huge amount of selling is not lost on me. But then again, I do, I've posted and my website is keywords and SEO'd to the hilt because I really, really worked on it, so people find me. So yeah, when you come up on the first page of Google, then it's quite nice.
So I'm interested to talk about the jump that you made. You mentioned it already. So you've been doing kind of graphic recording or visual storytelling for the last, I think you said 6 or 7 years, but you had a different career.
Yeah. So I worked in sales when I graduated from I've got a degree in textile design. And when I graduated, quite a long time ago, there wasn't an awful lot of work, and I had student debts, and I had to find a job. And I, like a lot of students, I found myself in sales. And I think once you get sales on your CV, it's really difficult to get away from that. And for a long time, I enjoyed the environment, working for big companies. I did a stint at GE Capital. I've worked for quite a lot of large financial institutions, but I always felt that this creative thing was, just put to one side. And then when the recession came in 2009, I was completely burnt out. I was literally wearing black to work every day because I hadn't got the energy to figure out what to wear, and we weren't actually selling. We were trying to get clients to pay and whatever. And I pretty much, it wasn't an if I lose my job, it's when I lose my job. And I just said, I am going to take time off. I need to recharge. I need to think, and so I'm going to travel. And so in February 2009, I got the call to say, yeah, okay, your time's up here. And 2 weeks later, I'd bought return tickets to Argentina, and borrowed a friend's backpack, and said, right, I'm not making any decisions for the next 6 months. And I went to Argentina, and about 3 days before I went, I thought, well, I don't want to be sending emails to everybody telling them what I'm going to do. I think I'll do a blog or something. And I thought, and then that's where I discovered WordPress, and I bought an iPod Touch. So it wasn't an iPhone, it was an iPod Touch. I thought, I need Wi-Fi, but I don't want to be carrying around a laptop. And I remember the first blog post was to blog or not to blog. That is the question. I think I'm probably not the only person who's used that. And I set off to Argentina with a plan already, for the first 5 or 6 days, I knew what I was doing. And after that, I just made it up as I went.
I have to jump in for just a moment, just to ask. So 2000, because there's a lot of good stuff in here that I want to unpack a little bit. So 2009. So just before this happened, where were you working then?
I was working for a division of GE Capital. I was selling leasing of leasing of semi-remolques. In Spanish, it's trailers, things that hang off the back of
Okay.
lorries. Yeah, so I was selling to truckers.
And were you living already in Spain at the time?
Yeah. I've lived in Spain for 21 years now. The first 20 in Madrid, and the last 8 months in the Canary Islands.
So you're living in Madrid, and basically the economy crumbled, as we all know. 2007 started,
Yeah.
then 2008 got really bad, and 2009 it had hit your industry. And you were just sort of waiting for the call, and you got it. I think you said, was it January or February the call came in that?
Okay, so yeah, and so so I disappeared to Argentina for 2 months, and I started blogging.
And when they told you, did you get any sort of like severance or anything like that? Did they give you did you have like a few months salary of like
Yeah, I hadn't been working for the company very long. It wasn't quite 2 years, but there was that, and then I also had redundant, dole money, in unemployment benefit, which at the time in Spain was actually quite good. And I was also quite recently divorced, so I did have a cushion.
So a lot of change happening in your life at once, it sounds like. And so your response to that was basically, I'm leaving. Yeah, it's time for something different. I don't know what, but it's time for something different.
Yeah, I need to work my shit out, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I just knew I couldn't continue. And so I went to Argentina. I started blogging, and I wrote 43 blog posts on an iPod Touch.
I love that. I mean, I've seen in my tech career and just, being involved in online businesses and things like that, I think I've seen a wide range of strategies and things being. I don't know anyone else who's blogged from an iPod.
Yeah, yes, it was an iPod Touch, 43 posts, and then I had a digital camera, because this was the one, internet cafes and whatever. So I would go to the internet cafe, and I would go to my WordPress site, plug the digital camera in, and then put my pictures from whatever I wanted into the blog posts, and that's how I learned how to use WordPress. And it was at this point, it was when all the creativity started coming out. It was literally, I always say, it was a bit like, when you go into a house, it's typically a British house, and you start peeling off wallpaper from the walls, and you keep going and you keep going, and you're like, oh my God, that was the 1970s or whatever. And then you get back to bare brick. And that was what I likened it to. I was like, as soon as I started writing, I literally couldn't stop. And I just had so much I wanted to say. And I didn't care if anyone was reading this stuff, I get the odd comment and whatever, but for me it was just like, and I went through the whole, using as many adjectives as possible in one paragraph. And I read it back now, but there's some really, really happy memories from that. So yeah, 43 posts later, on an iPod Touch, that was when I just said, right, okay, there's stuff going on here. But I also started taking photos as well. So I dabbled again with photography, which I'd left behind. Basically, it was the whole of the creative me started to burst out. And it was a bit like, once you open Pandora's box, there's no way that baby's going back in again. So I went, hell-bent on looking of a way to find a creative outlet to start making a living. And I actually went in the end for photography, and I tried documentary photography and also sports photography, and I made lots of mistakes and whatever. I dedicated myself to buying lots of photography equipment, and it was the whole all the gear and no idea kind of thing. I learned so much from that. I did, I tried working for myself, and I got a few gigs. I actually did do a job for the UEFA.
Cool.
But in the end, it wasn't working. So I ended up having to go back into the corporate world, and I was back in the corporate world for a couple of years between 2000 and I think it was 2011 to 2013, and then I lost my job again. I'm good at getting fired. I lost my job at the end of 2013, and that was more, I was a pawn in some kind of political game. And, when you increase sales by 30% in 9 months, and they still want to get rid of you, you're kind of like, okay, there's other stuff going on here. And at that point, I just said, right, I'm not working for anybody ever again. and I'm going to do something which combines my creativity with my business background. And friends would be like, well, what? You're going to design websites? I'm like, no, it's not designing websites. Well, what is it? I don't know, but I'll find it. I'll find whatever it is I'm going to do. And it was February 2014, I think it was. I picked up my iPad and started doodling with the most basic stylus. And I had an iPod mini, and I just started doodling. And then I started posting on Tumblr and whatever. And then the creators of the app picked up one of my doodles. And that was when I suddenly started seeing that what I did had a bit of an impact. I went viral. I had 60 likes. That was viral for me. and then from there, I just, carried on. And I did my first big job for like a big pharmaceutical on an iPad mini with a really basic stylus, sponge stylus. So yeah. And then from there, things just carried on. And then I got interested in doing the video side of things, like whiteboard animations. And then I just didn't look back. So, and then we met at Nomad City.
It all sounds so smooth when you describe it that way. But I think from knowing you, there were a few bumps on the road and some interesting inflection points. So just going back to your travel, I mean, I can't resist as a fellow traveler. So you left Spain. You had these kind of two parallel journeys going on, right? Your professional and creative kind of side, but you also left and you went to Argentina and you'd planned out, I think you said, the first 5 days of the trip. What happened after that?
So yes, I was in Argentina for 2 months, and then and I came back, and then I went to South Africa for 2 months, and then some friends invited me, and I spent the end of the year in San Francisco. But Argentina, I was there for 2 months, and so I spent the first couple of days in Buenos Aires, and then flew down to Ushuaia. And then from Ushuaia to Calafate. And then I had friends who were Argentinian friends who I knew from Madrid, who basically said, the time of year you're going, you're better off going through the interior, because on the coast there's no penguins, there's no whales at this time of year. It was April time. Yeah, it was April I left and came back at the end of May. And so and I'd always wanted to go down to Torres del Paine, and I wanted to see Perito Moreno and whatever. But in the end, the things that I was seeing in Argentina, it was sort of like, all I remember thinking was, I need space to think. And in Argentina has quite a lot of space.
Yeah, if you go down to Patagonia and those places that you're talking about, there's nothing but open land and the occasional sheep.
Yeah. So and that was it. And I mean, but so at the time I was kind of like, and like I said, the adjectives kept flowing because, the scenery, I mean, it's just, it blows your mind. And so, but I was having this whole sort of like, I'd get to a hostel and I'd plan where I was going the next day, or then in 2 days' time. And so then, I knew what I wanted to try all these. So, I did Torres del Paine. I skipped over into Santiago because I had a friend there, and then came back and then went up through Bariloche, Mendoza, Cordoba, Salta, Jujuy, and Iguazu. And I in the end I learned just to go with the flow, and it was very much, the less you plan stuff, the more magic happens. And the people who I chose pretty much to travel on my own as well. I met people along the way, but I very much sort of like beat my own path. And there was a guy who I met in a hostel in Bariloche, and we talked afterwards. We stayed friends and whatever. He said, "Yeah, when I met you, I had the impression you just had enough of people." I was just like, I was just on this massive voyage of self-discovery, and I had lots of adjectives to get out and quite a lot of Malbec to try as well. So yeah, and I wasn't going on that, let's all 20 of us all go to a pizza parlor, or where's the nearest party. That wasn't, I was still in hostels because it was the cheapest way, and also, you had people around you and whatever, but I wasn't going down the whole, one city to the next. I was literally sat gazing at my navel and figuring stuff out. So
more people need to take trips like that, just no plans, traveling by yourself and just seeing what happens. I know not everyone has the luxury to do that, and certainly it's not all possible right now in most places, but whenever it is possible again, just so much change and discovery and self-discovery comes out of that kind of travel, where you just see what happens as you go.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word earlier, the inflection point, and Argentina for me was a massive inflection point in my life, because it was where I just kind of like said, the only way to be happy is to be true to yourself. And for me, it was getting back to my creative roots, which had been literally, it was, the layers and layers of wallpaper had been there. And I needed to do that. And it's sort of been very much, even though I've had to, the roads haven't necessarily gone the way I wanted to, eventually I got locked onto the road I wanted to. And then from there, you just look at there's other opportunities that come out as well.
So you gave photography a go, and that was certainly a more creative outlet, I imagine, than sales. And so you made that sort of slight pivot, but didn't find the success you were looking for there and ended up back in a job. So how did you get from back in a job to graphic recording? You mentioned, starting to share some drawings and things, but did you have an idea at that point that graphic recording was something it was a thing that anyone could do professionally, let alone yourself?
Yeah, so when I sort of started finding all of these communities on Twitter, I found something to do with graphic recording, and then I realized that I'd actually already, I used to put big pieces of paper up on my wall at home whenever I needed to get ideas out. I like working big, so I already had the paper and a couple of marker pens. And then I discovered this graphic recording thing, and I was like, oh, that looks really interesting. I wonder how I can get into that. And then I just thought, well, I'll get some TED Talks, and I'll just grab a TED Talk. And I, at the time, just in a notebook, because that was it. I was one of the things I followed on Twitter was the sketchnote army. So these are sketchnoters who work and it's literally note taking, but it's visual note taking. And so there's two guys who run the Sketchnote Army website, Mike Rohde and Mauro Torselli. And I latched onto with the Today's Doodle, the Sketchnote Army thing. So I started sketchnoting TED Talks. And then there was a company based in the UK called Inky Thinking who were looking for people to bring on board as freelancers. And so I did an interview session with them, and they liked what I did, and I was still working small scale. And so what I then did was just put some big paper up at home and started practicing large scale. And then I found an event close to where I lived in Madrid. And it was all to do with, I think it's people being entrepreneurial and stuff like that. And I just contacted them and sent them some pictures of the TED Talks I'd captured and saying, would you like something like this at your event? And like, yes, but we have no budget. I'm like, that's fine. I need, I'm just starting. So I went and did that, and I did a couple of those, and then from there, you start building up portfolio, and I started doing work for Inky, and then in parallel, I've worked pretty much on my own, and I work in both languages as well, so that also
But
helps.
I love your strategy, though. I just feel the need to kind of call that out. When you say you did this for TED Talks, you were essentially watching TED Talks that had already been recorded. You were watching them online. They weren't your TED Talks. No one had hired you to do this.
Yeah. But it was just for practice. I would do it for practice. So I'd listen to a TED Talk, and at home I'd just be like, okay, and then think about how you capture things and how you can sum, a paragraph up in something very, very limited imagery sort of thing. Because at the end of the day, we can say a whole phrase, but there's probably 2 or 3 keywords within a phrase that are actually going to spark the memory. So I just practiced with TED Talks in my notebook.
But then you shared those also. It sounds like you made that sort of part of your portfolio when you started approaching people who you could do this work for. And I just think that there's so many creative fields where you sort of get stuck in this, like, I don't have any experience, but I can't get a job to gain the experience because I don't have any experience, like this catch-22. And what you're describing is the exact, I think, remedy for that, which is to just give yourself the job, do it as if someone was paying you to do it, create a portfolio. It doesn't matter. Like, nobody needs to know whether you're being paid for it or not. And you don't need to be deceptive about it, but just do the work as evidence of you being able to do the work. And then you can make your own little portfolio and start to get paid gigs. And was that first one that you did, was that not paid? It sounds like you just kind of told them, hey, I want to do this for you.
Yeah, but what it did was it got me visibility, and then I could post on Twitter, and it was for the town hall of Alcobendas, which is a It's a small town to the north of Madrid, and so the mayor of Alcobendas even came over at the end and was like, I really love, and he tweeted me or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, and then yeah, as I say, you just build portfolio that way, and then obviously that meant that the company I was doing the work for, Inky Thinking, they saw, they had more of my work as well to promote, and they could see then I could actually handle the pressure of work. Because at the end of the day, as somebody once said to me, when you're doing graphic recording, you're the only person who listens to everything, aren't you?
That's a good point. Yeah, you really can't afford to zone out. All of us, go to conferences and events, and you listen to a couple of talks, and then you're like, I'm just going to hang out in the coffee area for a bit. I need a breather, but you can't do that when you're there.
While everyone's having coffee, I'm colouring in. I'm like, I'll do the colouring in when everyone's having coffee. But no, you do. I finish, and so I've done 1 day, 2 day, 3 day events, and 3 days is a lot. Two's good going, and afterwards I'm incoherent. I can't string a sentence together because it's just the level, the adrenaline and the level of focus that you need, and yeah, so it's good though. But
you started doing these kind of what I would call like spec projects, right? Doing work on spec where you just, no one was necessarily paying you, and then you found is it Inky Thinking, which started to give you, it sounded like, freelance work. So I'm wondering, like, at the point when you started doing this, were you still in that second stint of corporate career, or had you already left that?
I lost my job in I think it was the December, and I started doodling in the following February, and then I found this whole community not long after that. So I started really, it was about 10 months after I'd lost my job. I actually started getting my first paid gigs. So
at what point did it sort of enter your mind that, like, you might actually be able to do this as a career, like that this could be more than, a creative outlet or a fun hobby?
I think when I started getting involved, it was like, this is the way I'm going. I was very much, this is, if I can make this work, this is what I'm doing. And what I did was I took the lessons I learned from when I did photography. After spending a heck of a lot of money on equipment, what I did was I went with the limited amount of marker pens and whatever, because again, you actually become more creative the more limited your resources are. If you actually saw my marker collection now, you might have gone over the top again. But yeah, you do. You just become a lot more resourceful. And so I just said, right. And at the same time, I was applying for jobs. I thought, well, I'm not going to stop applying for jobs, but I tried to try and put this into words. I know when I started trying to do photography, I was saying to people, I'm going to be able to talk. I'm a photographer, I'm or whatever. And when I started doing the graphic recording and stuff, I was going, well, I'm doing this little thing in parallel, but I never looked at it head on. It was almost like if I just sort of let it carry on alongside me applying for jobs. And I was, at the same time, I was doing visual CVs and goodness knows what. I was making everything a picture. But I didn't go around announcing that this is what I was going to do, and it gained traction little by little, and I just thought, if it doesn't work, I haven't actually told anyone I'm doing this, so it's fine. It's a bit like the teaching stuff. It's only the graphic facilitation group, but as it started to gain traction, and every now and again, a friend would say, "No, you're still doing that doodly woodly thing," or whatever, or I've got a couple of things on. Yeah, I'm doing something for And then it just gradually grew from there.
And at what point did you feel sort of comfortable actually telling the world, like, this is what I do? It's not a little side gig while I look for my next job, but like, I'm Verity, the graphic recorder or visual storyteller. Like, when did that become your identity?
It wasn't that much after, I think. So I started doing my first sort of paid gigs in, I say it was about September, October, November, and then the following year, that was it. Somebody posted in the Facebook group that was some gig in Barcelona in the March, and they couldn't do it. Can anybody do it? And I just said I can, and I got this job, and it was for a citizen science conference, and there was the keynote speaker was a guy from the European Commission, and 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 it was an Irish guy, and when he finished his speech, and when he came over to look at the visual at the end of it, I just said, oh, he'd mentioned some European Commission conference that was going to take place. I said, I can come to that, can't I? And I got the gig. And I think that was it when I said, yeah, okay, I've got a gig with the European, yeah, okay, I can tell people now that I'm actually doing this for real and whatever. And then I started doing work for other NGOs and bigger companies, as I said, the pharmaceutical. And then once I started getting, and I realized people really liked what I was doing, and they would come back, can you do this as well? Can you do that as well? We want to make our PowerPoint presentations more engaging. And that was when I went, okay, I can do it. When I realized I could pay the rent and I wasn't, getting to the end of the month going, so.
That's generally a good measure of like you found yourself, something to take seriously. I love too that it sounds like at every point along the way, it was you stepping up first to just do these on spec as we talked about, and then in that Facebook group, just kind of no one was handing you the work, stepping up and saying, yeah, I can do that. And then from that event, finding another one and saying, hey, I can come to your other event. It's, volunteering oneself, I think, is an underrated strategy.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. And I think, and that was it. And then occasionally on Twitter, I've seen the odd thing where an event, and I kind of like anything that's related to things like, sustainability or citizen science, or things that will, I'm working now, and you will have seen the presentation by Chris from Mosabi. I'm collaborating with Mosabi, which is all about financial education in developing countries and whatever. So anything that's also, got a little bit more of a social, economic, greater good of more people as well. I like as well. So
we're 6 months or so into this kind of pandemic and shutdown, and not too many physical in-person meetings are happening right now, conferences and things like that. So where does that leave you? Are you still able, and is there demand for doing this kind of work on something like a Zoom where you're attending remotely?
Yeah, so now that the work has gone remote and digital, 100% digital. For me, I mean, there are people who are still working on paper at home, have the whole setup with webcams and whatever. But yeah, and I mean, I was quite lucky in the fact that when pandemics, when the lockdown started, I was working on quite a big project with a number of videos, so I had that to sustain me. But at the same time, the week that we were locked down, I had a conference cancelled that I was going to be live at. But what happened was, within the community of graphic facilitation and graphic recording, it's quite a tight community. We have this group on Facebook, and very often, as I said, if somebody can't do a job, they'll actually put it out to the group. And there's also the International Forum of Visual Practitioners, where work gets shared, or if somebody can't do something physically, then they'll say anybody up for doing this, or any Spanish speakers, or anybody who can work Pacific time on such a day. And a lot of these people within the community, there's a lot who hadn't done a lot of digital work, had predominantly worked on paper. And so again, it was, you mentioned me putting myself out there. I'm quite a nerd with the digital side of things, and I work a lot on the iPad, and I work on 2 different softwares on the iPad, which are Procreate and Concept, 2 different apps. And I got into the animation side on one of them, and I just put it out there on the group saying, if anybody wants to learn a little bit about how to work, use Animation Assist on Procreate, I'm happy to do a masterclass if anyone's interested. And literally within 36 hours, I had 100 people say yes. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. So I've
just from within your group.
Yeah, that's it. And so coming back to your question, I've kind of started compensating what I might have lost in the live work with doing teaching, which in a way, and we were talking about this earlier, I've talked about doing online classes of explaining things with Doodles and whatever, and I've signed up for Teachable, I've signed up for Poetry, I've signed up for Kajabi, I've gone on there and gone, oh, I've got to create the content, and then not been got there. And then with this, I just said, right, I'm going to do a masterclass, and that way I've got the interaction with the people. I know what their questions are. Obviously, it's a very specific group with specific needs. So I knew I would be able to answer the questions because I've gone through those kind of pain points at the same time. And as a result, I started giving masterclasses, and I love it. So for me, lockdown and the pandemic has basically fast forward a lot of the stuff that I've just faffed around with for the last 18 months. And it's also made me realize that rather than maybe creating online courses, I might want to create more like communities or stick with masterclasses and then look at how I can develop that. And so I've kind of, done the pivot thing and started to compensate what I might have lost in revenue with live stuff. I've started doing the teaching, and I very much was conscious of the group. I put my stuff out at, pay a fair price because I wanted to be able to reach everybody, and for everybody, there's a lot of people who lost their main source of income. So
you just said to the group basically, is anyone interested in learning this, and you got, it sounds like an overwhelming number of replies, and then rather than go and create a formal pre-recorded course, are you teaching it like in something like Zoom or something live?
Yeah, so it's masterclass in Zoom, and so I generally, what I'll do is I will teach one in the morning and one in the afternoon, so that people on different time zones have the option of joining one, which isn't, it doesn't mean I'm getting up at 3 in the morning, and that means there's interaction, so people will ask questions, or if people need me to repeat something, it's great. And then also, I find out what they're looking for as well. So, the first one I did, which was quite an advanced class on the animation feature, I did a couple of things where people are like, oh my God, how did you do that? That was magic. And I said, okay, well, that'll be the next masterclass, and then also there were people who were complete beginners. So I just did masterclasses. And like I said, I like the interaction because I then know what people are after.
You're doing your market research and getting paid for it, but I just think I've dabbled a bit in teaching and course creation myself, and I find that it's, when you're not live, when you don't have the students either in front of you or at least interacting in real time, it's so much more difficult to sort of, guess what someone might get stuck with or what they know or don't know. As you said, different students are at different levels. If you can do it this way first, especially the way you've done it, where you basically just said to the group, like, hey, is anyone interested in this? You had no sort of sunk cost at that point. Had they said, nope, or you got no replies, like, you're only out the time it took you to write that Facebook post.
Yeah, and I was blown away. I mean, it was just like, oh, right, I better think about how I'm going to do this. So yeah, and so that's why I ended up doing it through Gumroad, and because it was the simplest, and I think sometimes and it goes back to the all the gear and no idea. We think we've got to have everything done, and it's all going to be and then sell it. Whereas actually, it's going back to the basics of just seeing who your audience is, who might be interested, and it's the same thing with, I've tinkered with this, this explain things with a doodle. And I ended up teaching a course here on with an organisation here, this Society for Economic Promotion of Gran Canaria, and that was a series of 4 masterclasses. And from that, I learned a lot because I wasn't dealing with people who were within my sector. This was people who maybe wanted to use Doodles for the work environment or whatever. And there you get a whole different set of questions. Then you realise that you have to explain things in a different way. So I'm learning at the same time, which is great, but it's given me a great way of thinking, right, okay, well, if I want to market further down the line, I now have a better idea. So you've done that research, and like where a student with that kind of background is likely to get stuck or what questions they have, and you can like bake that into the course material versus just brain dumping everything and then you're on lesson 10 recording or whatever, and someone who's taking it is stuck on lesson 1 because the thing that you thought was an easy, keyboard shortcut or whatever, they have no idea, and you've just lost them. Yeah. And it's I think the storytelling thing, because I'm so used to sort of getting involved with narrative, because not only was when I was doing sort of a bit of blogging, when I was doing photography, I was very lucky in that I had a mentor who was a World Press Photographer winner.
Wow.
And he really helped me with visual narrative and whatever. And so, yeah, things like narrative, it may be something that is quite obvious to me. But then, you start talking to somebody else. It's when you're talking with clients about when they want to tell a story, and let's not do it in a linear fashion, okay? Because that's the way that a lot of people think. Oh, we do this, then we do that, and we do that. How about we wrap it all up in a narrative? Yeah. And you've got to bring people think. And so when I was doing the explain things with the doodle, and I started getting onto narrative, I realized, oh, this is going to need more than one class. More than one session. So you learn as you go along as well. So like you say, if you're building a course, it's like when you're doing sketches. Like when you're doing sketches for a final piece of work. Until you've done the sketches, you don't know what's going to be difficult to execute.
The other thing that's standing out to me, though, as I hear you describing this, is that on the surface, and even as I was kind of putting my notes together before this episode, on the surface, it sounds like you're this person who's had this like giant kind of pivot from this very buttoned up corporate career to what you're doing now. And I'm sure there's some truth to that, as we've discussed. But what I also hear is that you're sort of just accumulating and stacking skills. And this is a pattern that's come up on this podcast before. Like, you were in sales, and obviously sales is sort of a universal skill that can help you in any business, but certainly working for yourself, it's a very necessary one. But you also had this exposure to the corporate world and understanding, as you said earlier, kind of how they think and what they want, which would be very different to say, if you were just working as an artist, with a totally different set of clientele. But then what you just mentioned that kind of caught my ear was even photography, which sort of sounded like this detour during the find yourself phase, actually fed right into what you're doing now in terms of just the learning that you did and how to compose visually. And now with graphic recording, and now even teaching graphic recording, like, it's just all of these skills stacked together into what you are and what you're able to do now, and the brand and business that you've built.
Oh yeah, no, and it's the old. I was telling somebody yesterday here. I said, "Have you ever watched the Steve Jobs Stanford address? The joining up the dots." I sit there and I'm a walking example, because at the time when I delved into doing photography and I spent all of that money, and I'm quite sure there's a lot of friends who saw that as being a failure, whereas I see it as being a really massive key part to what I do now. Because as I say, when it comes to narrative, how you tell a story, and even the order that you put stuff in, it all goes back to that. And like I say, I was really lucky in that I had a great mentor.
Does textile design fit into that in some way? You mentioned that's what you studied initially.
So textiles, everybody thinks it's clothes. It's not. It's fabrics. And so basically, where the textile comes in, it's color, form, structure. I mean, any kind of creative study, there are always basics that you're going to keep going back to, and things like, as I say, color, form, structure, how and hierarchies, in the way that you put something together. So I always like to think I'm quite strong on color and using white space as well. And I've done quite, since I've started doing this, I've delved into graphic design, but I would never ever call myself a graphic designer. But I know how to do a layout. I know how to set things out. But again, it's just having that visual eye of what works, what doesn't work, and getting the balance between what's most important and what's secondary as well. It all comes in. When I did textile design, I learned. It was a long time ago. We didn't have Adobe Creative Suite. It was all paper and ink, and people are like, "Oh my God, you have real sketchbooks." I'm like,
yeah,
yes.
I'm just kind of curious, since you mentioned it. So, what would be like a typical career for someone who studied textile design? Like, what would you have been expected to go off and do with that type of a degree?
So people who design fashion fabrics or furnishing fabrics or weave on it. So yeah, it's the clothes were stood up on, or somebody has to design even just the jersey of this the weight of the cotton or the fabric and the drape and whatever. And my speciality was printed textiles. So you think of wallpapers, curtains, fashion fabrics which have a repeat on them. That's what I would have gone off and done.
And those are industries, if I'm not mistaken, that were big once upon a time in the north of England that I think subsequently went overseas. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, so I did my degree in Nottingham, which was a massive lace industry, but and then yes, and there were the textile mills up in the north of England. But and there are still some very big design houses in the UK. You know, some beautiful fabrics and whatever. But yes, I think a lot of production did. And nowadays, you know, again, people can go online and do their own fabric design and produce them and mass produce them and whatever. And this is where I get to become a bit of a purist. I would say, you know, you've got to understand how a pattern works and whatever, and repeats and things. But and I even dabbled when I first lost my job and I started doing creative stuff. I thought, right, I'm going to try on Photoshop to do, or Illustrator to do a repeat. And I was like, I'm much better off with photocopies and doing this and sticking them on a piece of paper, because that's how I learned.
Whereas I think a lot of people now, like, you know, are only comfortable digitally. So I think having that, you know, having experience working in both mediums has certainly helped you, especially because I've seen you work on, you know, like this a giant, basically like a wall of paper as your canvas.
You can't double tap on paper. You can't double tap. It doesn't undo. I've tried it.
We started your story. You were already, you know, working in sales and living in Spain. So how did you end up in Spain to begin with?
So my ex-husband, who wasn't my ex-husband at the time, he was my soon-to-be husband. He got offered a job in Madrid with Amadeus, and at the time I was also looking for a new job, and we just said, right, okay, whoever gets offered the job first, that's what we're going to do. And so when he was offered the place in Madrid, it was like, right, well, adventure, let's go and do it. So yeah, we did. So it was 1999 that I moved over, and then when, you know, got divorced, and I was, well, not going back to the UK. You know, I spent most of my adult life in Spain, so yeah, there was no question.
But you recently moved again. You're still in Spain, but you're now no longer on the peninsula, and you're living in Gran Canaria. Is that right?
Yeah, I moved. So I left Madrid on the 11th of January. I spent 6 weeks in Tenerife in a co-working place there in Nine, and that was part of the plan, but I was always coming to Las Palmas. I'd spent about 4 or 5 years looking. I wanted to leave Madrid. I wanted to live by the sea. It had to be Atlantic. I wanted to be a good international community and whatever. And I hadn't even thought of the Canary Islands. And it was a friend who said something to me in about May last year. Why don't you look? And then from there, I discovered Nomad City conference. And I came in November last year for that week. And then 2 months later, I was sailing over. So yeah, it ticked all the boxes. Because I wanted somewhere I could do sport pretty much anywhere, year round as well.
It's the place where we met, and it's a place that I love and love coming back to. It's Las Palmas and Gran Canaria as a whole has become sort of like a second home to me.
Yeah, and it's really good. And obviously now, I moved into my new flat the day lockdown started, so it wasn't quite the start I was thinking I was going to have in Las Palmas, you know. So I do, but in a way it's quite good, because I think if I'd been here for like a year and then all of this had happened, I'd be like a bit resentful of having given up this, amazing outdoor life. Whereas, you know, I'm just starting it slowly.
Yeah.
Started doing sport again. Well, I did it for the first 3 weeks, and then we got locked down, and then because I was in co-living for the beginning, and then so my life here in Las Palmas is just getting going slowly, but don't regret it. And it's a great place to live.
Perfect. Well, we've come full circle. I think that's a really good place to leave it. But before we finish, for anyone who's interested in learning more about you and your work and just seeing some of the examples of what we've been talking about, what's the best place for them to find you?
So I've got my website, which is thinkdoodly.com. And then Instagram is also think_doodly, and then my own personal one, which is Verity_INK. They're the main places. I'm sporadic with Instagram, but Inktober's coming up. Inktober is where you get a challenge to draw something in ink for every day of October. and I managed to do it last year, so I'm hopefully going to do it again this year. So, and that's where I get my hands dirty.
I'll share links to all of those in the show notes. Verity, thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.